Hi, this is Dr. Jose Saldivar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. And one of the great things about this podcast, it has given me the opportunity and the privilege to reconnect with people I went to school with. And just phenomenal people, wonderful people, amazing people that are doing amazing things. And today my guest is no different. She is someone that I met in college. She was a few years behind me in college, but still just, I think, a phenomenal person doing amazing things, wonderful things. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself. So Nicole, would you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. First of all, Jay, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Nicole Sandoval. I am a nurse practitioner in family medicine, and I'm based in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from. And we'll get to the end, and I'm sure we're going to go through the journey of it. But I currently am, I do family medicine, but specifically something called street medicine, which is when we provide primary care to folks experiencing homelessness. So we go to their encampments, to their tents, to parks, under bridges, streets, and we just try to bring medical care to the people. So that's basically summarizes what I do. So
wow, that's amazing. And I'm looking forward to hearing the story because, I follow you on social media and I've seen you in action, seeing some of what you've posted. And if I think back to the Nicole I knew at Stanford, and I'm just going to be completely honest, I never would have imagined you doing what you're doing now. Just because I don't know, when we're 18, 19, 20, I mean, it's hard to picture us doing certain things, right? Certain careers. But I don't know that I ever had a conversation with you where I asked you what it is you wanted to do or what you wanted to be. And we'll get to that. But I just wanted to put that in your head. The question that I always ask my guests, though, is I always ask them, if you had to pick a point or identify a point where you would say my educational journey started here, where would that be for you?
That's such an interesting question. I would actually say that my educational journey started at 10 years old. And it's because when I was 10, my uncle he graduated from Stanford when I was 10. So I went to his graduation. And it was then that I realized that I wanted to go to Stanford. And the funny thing is that at 10 years old, what are you really evaluating your college choice based on? And mine was because you could rollerblade to class. In my 10-year-old mind, like that was, whoa, that's amazing. Like I want to rollerblade to class. And so I kind of had my heart set on Stanford from then on. And then as I got into high school, of course, like I learned, oh, wow, I have to do well in school to get there. And so that's when I started to get focused on, I would say, my educational journey, where I wanted to go. And since from a young age, I used to always say that I wanted to be a doctor. And so I think I love this podcast so much, Jay, because I think that life really has twists and turns. I'm almost 40 now, and it was not a clear, straight shot to doing, medicine on the streets as a nurse practitioner, right? Not even as a medical doctor. So there's so much about that journey, right? But I've always had an interest in people and science. And so I definitely still applied that while I was at Stanford. I was a human biology major. And I touched different points. Like I did some shadowing during summers in ERs and saw what doctors did, saw what nurses did. And actually, what's funny is you say you wouldn't imagine me doing what I'm doing now, but my hum bio, we call it hum bio. Do you remember hum bio major? My last year was a externship with a pediatrician who had a mobile clinic that was servicing homeless and uninsured teens in the Bay Area. And I was doing my externship there. So I do think that even at 18 and 19 years old, I was kind of missional minded. And I was interested in serving the communities. I just didn't know how that was going to translate to a career necessarily. But the foundation was there. Yeah. So.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea. And that's really cool. You know, and I appreciate you talking about that because, you know, one of the reasons I started the podcast is I come across a lot of young people, and I'll often refer to my niece's story. My niece went away to college. She went to a small private college here in Texas, and she graduated and I think was really disappointed because the job wasn't there. Like there wasn't a job waiting for her. And I remember during summers, I would often encourage her to do like internships or to shadow, to connect with people. And I often share that story with my students and with young people. And it's like they don't believe me. Like they're like, no, I'm just supposed to go to class, graduate, and my job is going to be waiting for me. And so I appreciate you taking the time to talk about like the externships, the shadowing that you'd done and that you did to kind of help give you some of that experience, or at least contribute to your decision making when you ultimately you decided whatever, what your path. Nicole, let me ask you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say you're totally still right, though. So what I did in college was I was doing the exploratory thing. Like, okay, I've always said I wanted to do this, but is it really that I want to do this? Is it really that I want to be a doctor? Or is it just because I've said that I wanted to be a doctor my whole life? And now it's just sort of the routine of saying it. So I think there's that consideration, right? So I tested those waters out. I had different experiences. I did still major in human biology, but I was not pre-med. And so if you want to go straight to medical school from college, typically people are pre-med. They do all their bio, chem, physics, all during college, which I did not do. So when I graduated, I did have I had a lot of this crisis internally, because I think that especially if you're a person that sort of built your identity on achievement or, direction or some goal, when you don't know what to do next, it can be very distressing. And I like to share that because I think that's super, it's normal, bottom line, it's normal. So I graduated from college. I wasn't pre-med. I wasn't applying to med school. I knew I liked people and science, but I still didn't know how to apply that. I didn't know where the job was for that after, right? I'm sorry about that. So I actually ended up working in real estate. Actually, no, I applied for one clinical research position right after college. I didn't even want to do research because I don't really like research, but I just didn't know what to do with my degree. And that seemed like the next best thing to do. I didn't get the job because obviously I probably didn't come across clearly that I was really interested in it. And so my friend happened to have a brokerage doing real estate at the time. And this is like in 2004, 2005, where the real estate market is booming. And he was basically like, why don't you, Nicole, you come help me with my real estate business while you're trying to figure out what to do after you graduate. And funny enough, I did real estate property management loans and like that for several years after college. So totally different than my path as a hum bio major. But when the real estate market crashed, and also again, fundamentally, I was a missional person. So I realized that the money was cool for a time, right? I'm 22 years old, like, woohoo, yeah, this is awesome. This money's great. But it wasn't really what I was committed to, right? It wasn't really what was in my heart to do, like what I felt purpose to do. So that only lasts a short time. And I figured it out. And I actually went back to school, actually decided to become a nurse. So I went back to school to get a bachelor's degree in nursing. So another bachelor's. And then ultimately decided to get my master's degree and become a nurse practitioner. So, yeah. So exactly, between graduating and even doing the BSN, that was like, I graduated in 2004, and I think I started my BSN in 2010. So that's six, kind of just not really being clear about what I wanted. So, yeah.
Wow. That's, yeah, I appreciate that. Man, I appreciate you sharing that, right? Because I think, I thought, and again, I didn't really know all of your story. I think there was a huge gap where I didn't keep up with you, right? And it was a little tougher, but I thought you did the hum bio, and then I thought, and then maybe you went into, nursing. But no, I love that. And I appreciate you talking about that, sharing that story. Let me ask you something really quick, though. If the housing market hadn't crashed, do you think you would have stayed in real estate?
No. Honestly, I don't think I would have stayed in real estate. I believe, and not to put too much pressure on people, but I do believe fundamentally, if we tap into what lights us up, we will be led down the path that's right for us. And real estate, in the way that I was doing it, meaning doing sales for other people, doing loans for others, all those things, that doesn't light me up. However, I will say that I believe that everything we do can be used for something in the future. So what I mean by that is that now, even though I'm working as a nurse practitioner, I'm thinking about how to use my current job to become an investor in real estate and apply what I've learned doing that, in my 20s, having that foundational knowledge and apply it for my life and seeing how I can be a blessing to others through, real estate investing. So things come around, right? I think if you're in a season where you're kind of thinking, I don't know how this is gonna, I'm just doing this and I'm just not just feel like it's useless time. I would just say, maybe it's not useless time. Maybe in the future, you'll see how what you're doing may not be related to your profession in the future, but it could add to your life in some way, Yeah,
absolutely. Now, Nicole, let me ask you, because I think you brought up a really good point, right? About what is it that lights you up? How do you tap into that? Like as a young person who, you've created this identity about this idea, and you talk about this idea that you want to do something. You don't really know what you want to do, but you've put this in your head that you're going to pursue, like a doctor, like you said, but you're not really sure. And so what advice would you give, a young person who's trying to figure out, what is it that lights me up? What advice would you give them?
Wow, that is such a good question. That's such a good question, because I think we don't even need to be young people, right, to be asking those questions. I'm still asking those questions, because our journeys, our professions are they're evolutions, so in so many ways. But I would say a couple things. Take time to be still. That's one thing. I personally love journaling. And it's not just a female thing. I know men that journal as well. And I think when you write out, you journal?
Yeah.
See? Because so many times we're just reacting to life, right? We're just reacting. Instead of getting some clarity on what our commitments are, you write down, how did I feel when I did this internship opportunity? What did I like about it? So I would say maybe you can establish a habit while you're in school and maybe just write something about the classes you're taking, or after you're finished. Did you like that? How did you feel about it? Did it light you up? What didn't you like? It's just a time to pause and reflect and then think, okay, what's my next action step from here? So I would say, taking whatever internship opportunities, classes, and processing those things in a quietly. I also think that sometimes we can feel like we need to be doing what other people want us to be doing or expect us to be doing. And I think taking some time and knowing what my motivations are. Like, am I wanting to be in the music industry because I want only fame and notoriety? Like, what is real? We have to be very honest with ourselves about what's motivating us towards specific professions or career goals. You know what I mean? And then sifting those out and saying, hey, is that a good enough reason for me to keep doing this? My grandma wants me to be a dentist. My grandma wants me to be a doctor. I really want to make my grandma proud. I mean, is that enough to get all the time and money and you know what I mean? So I would just say, and then for me personally, I feel spirituality is a big part of my journey and my faith. And so my faith informs my commitments, and just so tapping into what your commitments are, whether they're faith-based or whatever, I would say is helpful.
Thank you. I think that's really, one, I think it's really informative, and I think it's so contrary to what I feel like we see around us. Like, because of social media, it feels like the concept of like the rat race has always been there, but I don't know about you, but it feels like there's more anxiety around it now because of social media, and you're constantly like looking at your peers and look at them, they're doing this, and I'm not there, I'm not keeping up, right? And so for you to ask someone or to suggest, be still with your thoughts and really think about and reflect on, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that, lights you up? What is it that, brings you satisfaction, right? And especially for, you talked about being very mission driven, like for us to think about that, right? That kind of purpose. What is my purpose? What is it that I really find value in? And so I really appreciate that, because it is so contrary to what I feel like what the world has become and what we're living in and living with, right?
Yeah.
I took a break from social media for a few years, I think because of that, because it just felt like, wow, there was it was giving me anxiety, and it just was like, oh my God, I'm not keeping up. And
oh yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. People don't share their people do not share their bumps. Rarely, right? So rarely. So we may not get the job we want. We may get our first application denied from a grad school thing or whatever, right? Whatever the case may be, because life happens. And it just seems like everybody else is getting their house, getting their dream job, getting everything. Everything's just going very well for everyone. And so, yeah, it is an illusion. Social media is an illusion. And even now, I can totally relate to it, because it's like, and not that I love podcasts, and obviously we're doing one today. But you can feel, for the generation that's upcoming, that you have to have TikTok, Instagram, a podcast, a Twitch, this and everything possible. And so actually, for myself now, thinking about how can I honor also my capacity in driving my dreams forward. Like, what is the one next important thing for me to do, and focused on that instead of getting overwhelmed with all these possibilities and then be paralyzed and not move in any direction. Right. So like, what's the one next thing? Well, the next best thing to do is this. And then scale things based on, because I think there's probably people who are I think there's more entrepreneurial mindsets these days in these kids, right? Like, I think compared to our generation, Jay, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Who was it? I don't know if it was on a recent interview that I did, but I was in conversation with somebody about how it just felt like this generation was incredibly entrepreneurial and always thinking about, I was just having lunch with a buddy of mine, and he was talking about, he's a physician's assistant, and he said a lot of the younger PAs and nurse practitioners that he works with, they're 5-10 years younger, but they're talking crypto, and they're talking about this, and they're talking about that. And he said, he's in a position where he can invest and he can do these things, and he's scared. he said they seem so fearless, and I'm scared to jump into anything. And he said, and they're just like, whatever, and I said, yeah, I see it. I see it with my students. I see it with my nieces and whatnot. Yeah, absolutely. Much more entrepreneurial, I think, than we were at that age. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk about that, because I know you've talked about the real estate. You've got your hands in a lot of things. But let me ask you, I want to backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
Because you were doing the real estate, and the housing market crashes, and you said, you went back to school to get the BSN. Why the BSN? What was it? Because I know you were doing the HumBio, but what was it? Was there something in particular that led you to, hey, Nicole, you know what? Go and get the BSN. Like, why that route?
That's a great question. Because I started to think, okay, what do I love? And then reflect back on the experiences that I had while I was in college, shadowing the ER docs and all these things. And I personally feel that, well, in many ways, nurses have more patient touch points with patients than providers do. Okay. Like doctors, even nurse practitioners sometimes in some settings, because they're now kind of moved out of so I didn't really know at the time when I decided to go back to get the BSN that I wanted to have like prescriptive authority, which I do now as a nurse practitioner, meaning I'm managing my own patients as a nurse practitioner. Maybe I should clarify what a nurse practitioner does, because I think sometimes people don't know what that is. So a nurse practitioner is an advanced practice registered nurse. They have either a master's or a doctorate degree, and they basically they prescribe medications, they come up with medical treatment plans, they interpret tests, and all those things. Registered nurses don't do medical diagnoses. They don't prescribe medications. They don't do those kind of things. And at the time, I didn't necessarily know that I wanted the NP responsibility. So I decided to go back and just do the BSN and work as an RN for some time and figure out what to do next. So when I BSN, I didn't even know that I wanted NP. But I knew that, and so there's a nursing model of care, which is very holistic in the way that nurses are trained versus a pathology-based way of looking at it, which sometimes medical doctors are trained. They look at the pathology, the disease process, the anatomy. It's very focused on that. And nurses are a lot looking at the environment, like psychosocial, socioeconomic factors that impact why people are sick. And I felt like that model of care just was more consistent with who I am as a human being. And so that's why I decided to do nursing, and I wanted more access to the patient. So yeah. And then it developed. And when I was an RN, to be honest, I stopped. I wanted to have more control over the plan of care. And so that's when I became an NP. But that was after doing, I worked at ICU as a registered nurse for a few years. So does that make, did that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you answered that really well. And I appreciate you clarifying and distinguishing between the RN and the RN and the nurse practitioner. Because I think, for a lot of our young listeners out there, they may not know the difference. They may not know this distinction. So I appreciate that. So you get the BSN, become a nurse practitioner. How do you get into the work that you're doing now? Because I think, I have incredible respect for our first responders, our medical caregivers, right? But because I think it takes a special person to do that, to want to help, right, in that line of work. But then for you to go and to work with the homeless and with that population, how did you decide that's what I want to do?
Well, I think that so during that time where I said I was working in real estate, kind of having a little bit of a 25-year-old life crisis, not knowing what to do and how to apply like what I thought I was supposed to do. I actually got very involved with my church, and I went on 2 mission trips abroad. I went to Guatemala, a very rural town, and I went to Uganda. And in Uganda, we helped build homes for orphans and widows widowed by HIV. Okay, so it's a very cool. It's Watoto. It's this organization. It's so cool. They basically create communities and put widows and orphans together and make family units again. So it's very cool. One of the orphanages that we went to, they had, this is so sad, and I'm just a trigger warning for anyone right now, but sometimes the babies are unwanted and they dispose of them. They try to, put them in the trash can and all those things. So they're rescued and they're brought into the baby orphanage, almost like a makeshift NICU, like a neonatal ICU, where they really are caring for them. So they have nurses there. And I remember being there and thinking, I want to have a specific skill set to offer people. Like, I love the fact that I'm going here and building homes, but I want to have something tangible that I can offer. And for me, that was reconnecting to, the science and their nursing. So coming back, and I knew that I wanted to do some community health-based stuff as a registered nurse, as a nurse in general, actually. But right after I graduated, there's not opportunities in community health or RNs at that time. It was more so like go to the hospital and be an RN. And so that's what I did. But my heart was always for community work. And I always felt like if I could do something that feels like I'm a missionary in LA, like that's what I want to do with this. It's always felt like a calling to me. This is the bottom line. And so I went to UCLA for my NP specifically because they target underserved populations. They prepare their nurse practitioners to go out into the community and work with disadvantaged folks for the most part. And they had a clinical rotation at the Union Rescue Mission on Skid Row. And I know this is a lot of information, but this is how things worked out, line up exactly. I wanted to go to UCLA because of their work. And my first clinical rotation at UCLA was at the Union Rescue Mission, my first one. So it was like a confirmation for me that this is where I was supposed to be. And I loved it there. I loved it. And if you're not familiar with the Union Rescue Mission, it's a shelter on Skid Row. So it was amazing. I cried my very last day on my first rotation there because I loved it so much. And so, yeah, I've been a nurse practitioner for 5 years, and I've worked with the homeless for the last 5 years. So it's a calling for sure.
Wow. Sounds like you've had quite the journey.
I know. It's crazy. I have. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what you want to convey to the people that are listening, which is you don't have to know the end from the beginning. And yeah.
So I'm going to take that quote. I'm going to use that quote somewhere. You don't have to know the end from the beginning. I love that. That is powerful. So I know you're doing other things because I've seen you post. So let's get into, because I also feel like, so just to give you a little bit of background, even with my own journey. So I started working right at the university immediately after I got done with my master's there at Stanford. And what I share with my students a lot of times is, so in my time between then and now, I've consistently worked at the university, but was involved in a lot of community organizations, got into politics, was on the school board for a little bit. I actually owned a car wash, I owned a car wash. I owned a newspaper for like a year and a half or something. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm done with this. So, I've done a lot of things too. And I always tell my students, like, for me, I'm always like looking for different, I like to stay busy and I love to be able to do right. And so now I think my focus is really on my teaching and then on the consulting work that I want to be doing. I love working with young people. That I think has been consistent throughout my life, right? Whether it was back at Stanford, even before, worked at Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that, after school programs. And so that's been consistent. I love working with young people. I love mentoring. And so what I've always tried to do is connect those things. You've got your hands in a lot of things. So tell us about some of the other things that you're doing, and how have you've talked about specifically about the real estate and how that informed kind of your interest in investing and doing, like, trying to help, right, bless other people. Tell me about some of the work that you're doing, and how do you decide, you know what, I want to get involved with this. I want to do this.
Oh, I think how you decide is you start to have these unctions that don't go away. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like, something keeps coming to mind, to your heart, and maybe you don't act on it, but then you'll get like another person mentions something and it'll bring it up again. You're like, for me personally, that's how I believe God speaks to me, is these repetitive impressions or unctions. So that's the higher level. So there's just been some things about real estate that I feel I need to do. And also, it does back on the housing and the home, my work in homelessness, because there's a lot of people who do not want to rent out their properties to people on Section 8. And so I would like to, my future vision is to have units, apartment buildings, and where at least some of those are designated for folks to get them off the street, right? I know people who are 60 years old and they're never going to make more than their SSDI or SSI of $950 per month, right? So where are they going to go? Who's going to help them? Now, thankfully, we have programs through our government that help subsidize the housing. And my heart is to kind of figure out, how do we stabilize people with their basic needs, right? So that they can actualize their potential. Honestly, Jay, my heart, the root of everything that I do is I want to be a part of the transformation of people's lives. That summarizes my mission. And so I do that through the work on the streets. It's just, that's the mission. You come to a missional place, and I'm 40, almost 40. Okay. So if you're 22 and you don't know what your mission is, that's okay. You'll get there, but there's little pieces, building blocks, things that stir in your heart. You want to honor those things. You want to nurture things. And so figuring out how to help people with housing, continuing the work on the streets. And my newest venture is I've started a medical aesthetics business, which is very different from the work on the streets. This is like Botox, fillers, and you might be thinking, whoa, that's way in another realm from what you've been saying this whole time, Nicole. But again, it's my tagline for that is outer beauty, inner peace. So thinking about, how do I create an experience for my clients where they feel better on the inside after their treatment. We can inject faces, we can make people look different, but if you're not settled inwardly, life's not going to be better for you, not really. And so again, it's still missional. It's still connected to hope and possibility. And it's like the circle here of mission, and then these little prongs as you age, like, how can I do this? How can I do that? So yeah, it's a lot. I also have 2 children. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy, but it's fun. It's super fun.
Well, you seem to be enjoying yourself, and you seem to really enjoy what you're doing. And so, congratulations.
Thank you.
Nicole, thank you for your time. I think, I asked my guests before we sign off, what final piece of advice would you give our listeners? Any final bits of wisdom?
Yeah, I would say, I think the most important thing is knowing that your value is not in what you do. You take that with you for your whole life, and you will make decisions that are consistent with who you are on the inside. And then when things happen in your career, or, you'll have a stable sense of self, and it'll be much more difficult for you to just fall apart when things fall apart. Right? When things fall apart, that doesn't mean that I have to fall apart. Yes, we grieve and we can be sad about and disappointed, right? Those are all normal things, but you are more than what you do. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
I think that's beautiful. Thank you. And perfect. I think that's the perfect way to end the podcast. Nicole, thank you. Thank you for your time again. This concludes another episode of the Way to College podcast. Tune in next time. And don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast. Bye-bye.